Welcome to the Building Better Futures for Health series. I'm your host, Richard Sokolov, the co-founder and executive director of IDE Group. In this series, we'll be speaking with former winners, judges, and contestants of the Building Better Futures for Health contest that we run annually. Today, we're lucky enough to have Mick Brooks join us. He's the head of R&D for Bayer Radiology. Mick, thanks for joining us. You've been a long-time judge of the competition. Thanks for giving us your time.
Thanks for inviting me along, Richard.
Welcome to today's interview that we're doing, to the Building Better Futures for Health series that we've started this year. Pleasure to have you along. Always great to see you face to face for the first time in a long time.
Well, thanks for inviting me along to be a judge again this year. It's been a great adventure over the last 5 or 6 years since you guys started doing this, so I'm happy to be involved.
Yeah, you've one of the stalwarts of BBFH since 2016, which has been great, and you've always been so insightful and so giving of your time, which we've always really appreciated. I thought maybe you better start off with just talking a little bit about your background. Not many people probably know about you. So do you want to tell us a little bit about how you got into product development? I know you've got a pretty interesting background from our discussions over a few years. You want to share that with the...
Interesting to engineers, maybe. Yeah, look, I am an electrical engineer originally.
Yeah.
I did work in telecommunications, and I had 8 years working in the astronomy business, which is not really a business, but it's designing and putting up and writing software for telescopes, which was a good introduction to sort of the world of medical devices, which basically just another subclass of scientific instrumentation, if you want to look at it from that way, which is an engineering kind of viewpoint on things. So yeah, I had an extensive career before I got into medical devices, and I got into medical devices as a software developer, writing embedded code inside of anesthetic machines and anesthetic ventilators.
Yeah. So you went from space into the clinic. So what took you through that journey? And why space to start with, and then why to switch to? Was it just opportunistic? What was it?
Yeah, my move into astronomy was pretty opportunistic. I just responded to a job down in Canberra at Mount Stromlo. So, and it wasn't paid that well because it was part of the university system. But that was a really interesting job. There's a lot of similarities. You've got sensors and you've got actuators, and in all scientific instrumentation, and I've always been really interested in how software links those together. So we made telescopes that had to track very faint objects, that had to make corrections for the atmosphere on the light that was coming into the sensors. It's kind of similar, except you're looking outward rather than looking at somebody's body or doing something to a person.
Different spaces, I guess.
Yeah, but you're kind of trying to deal with the real world. You're trying to deal with physics and reality out there, and do that using machines, and that's what we do.
And you spent time in the USA, from memory, yeah?
Yeah, I worked on a fairly large radio telescope project
right.
there for about 4 or 5 years. That telescope is in operation up in Chile. That was a pretty challenging project. It's up at a high Sierra plain at 5,000 meters height. So the people working up there have to have oxygen or else they go a bit dopey. So it was a pretty challenging sort of engineering project. And again, we worked on there's actually 64 antennas. We worked on how to make them all point in the same direction on the sky at the same time. And how to get all those things to work together to compensate for the atmosphere, compensate for wavefront differences. There's all sorts of mathematics that go into that.
I always learn something new when I speak with you, Mick. That's for sure. Always got me on my toes, technically and otherwise. So how did you make your way into like medtech? How did you make it back to not back, but to medtech?
I did want to come back to Australia and work in industry. I'd worked primarily in university sector at that point in time. I did want to come back to Australia and work in industry, and I wanted to work with some people that were trying to do stuff in Australia for Australian businesses and for reasonably ethical endpoints, and the medical industry certainly offers that. So when I came back, I started looking for jobs in that area, and I got another job as a software engineer in that anaesthetic ventilator company I mentioned.
Yeah, I think we share a bit of that sort of passion for Australian sort of innovation, and I always sort of talk about, when I travel, about this sort of culture we have here of innovation in Australia, which is unique. It's sort of that blend of that, core research and the pragmatism that comes with being where we are in the world and having to do a lot with a little. Is that sort of how you see it to some degree? I think we share a little bit of that, right? And that sort of...
Yeah, I agree. And working overseas, you see that a lot. You see a lot of Australians in sort of core positions where you need somebody to call a spade perhaps, and actually, get things done. So And I think that one of the weird things about Australia is we have this viewpoint of ourselves as being a little bit too laid back and not very hardworking when compared to the US or Europe. And for the people that actually, the Australians that actually do go overseas, I think the opposite's true. We're the hardest working, most effective people. Well, I mean, that's a bit of a stretch, I guess, but there's a lot of effectiveness in what we do. We're happy to call a day over at a certain point, but we get a lot done in that day.
Yeah, I've noticed that as well, is that especially medtech as well, we punch above our weight quite considerably, although we're still quite small. And part of BBFH is trying to make that pool bigger in our little neck of the woods. But, you know, I agree with you. This whole concept of we're very pragmatic. We can do a lot with a little, which is, you know, part of why IDE exists is try to help people do that. That's really something I think that's genuinely unique about Australia. I wish we'd have promoted it a bit more. But yeah, it's great to see that sort of there are like-minded people all trying to pull in the same direction in all our little necks of the woods. Yeah, great. So I guess the good segue is to your role now. Mm-hmm. So you're R&D manager at Bayer, or Imaxeon, which is Bayer Healthcare. Perhaps you should introduce your title.
Well, Imaxeon was an Australian startup company from the 1980s, and it was acquired by Bayer back in 2006. So the legal entity still exists, but I actually work for Bayer. So I'm the head of Bayer Radiology R&D in Australia. And that grew about, I started with a team of 4 engineers back in 2008, and we built a bunch of injectors which sold really well. And this is something that I was going to get to just before, is that you've got to be outward looking when it comes to developing products in Australia. We already had a fairly stable business with good revenue flow, so we didn't really need this product. But it fills a niche around the world, and that product wouldn't be all that economically viable if it was only in Australia. We sell, our biggest markets are overseas. Australia is something like 2% of the global medical device market, and the only way to make that work is to try and build something that is going to be useful outside Australia as well.
Yeah, it's funny because every time we engage with people and companies and startups and founders, it's that's the message that we're always talking about. You're always looking outwardly, and people ask us, where do you do most of your work, or for whom? And it's usually like, even if we're working for people in Australia, it's always outward looking, because that's where the market is and that's where the opportunities are. But I think Australian companies are actually pretty good at doing that. And I think also this pandemic has shown a little bit that doing things remotely can be done. I think it's been a sort of a good thing for Australian industry in a certain way, that people now understand that you don't have to be there to actually design or develop and commercialize products for other parts of the world, I think, which we do really, really well. So I guess you've been with us at BBFH since 2016. We've been working together since before that. What got you involved in BBFH? I think that's probably a good segue into that question. What got you involved?
Well, one of the things that I do really enjoy about working with IDE is that encouragement that you give to local entrepreneurs, and you talk about being giving of your time. BBFH is part of that. I mean, there's a lot to be gained from people seeing other people's efforts and all getting together with more experienced people so they can learn what's going to work and what's not. I mean, I've seen a lot of naivety and a lot of great ideas, but that's what you're here to try and promote. And I think that really is attractive to me, to be involved in that. Plus, I mean, there's a bit of an ego trip in judging everybody. I like being judgmental.
I wouldn't say that about you, but you like to scratch the surface. I think you like to sort of dig in. That's what I've noticed. Your questions are always really insightful, because for those people that don't know that about BBFH, there's this background work that happens when we get applications and we review them. We try to narrow them down, and then there's interviews that you go through. And I've seen you, obviously at first hand, how you dig in. How is that process, do you think, actually help an applicant when they start to engage with the likes of you and our other judges?
There's a pretty wide range of experience amongst the judges, and there's a pretty wide range of things that these entrepreneurs need to consider. And mostly they understand that there's enough information on the internet for people to touch all the bases, but it depends on how well they touch them. Do they have a regulatory plan, and where are they going with that? A lot of the times I see people coming in saying, did you know that there were, X Brazilian numbers of procedures in this area last year, and each one spent, X dollars. So therefore there's a global market of $1 trillion gazillion, right? No, there's not. That's just how much they're spending, right?
Yeah,
I mean, there's a lot more to it than that. And people try to wind up your interest by sort of just throwing massive numbers around, but
yeah.
really you've got to target down. What am I doing better than the opposition? What's happening now? What am I doing better? And why would anybody switch to what I'm doing?
Yeah.
How does it benefit everybody?
It's interesting because, like, as I've grown up in the industry, as I put it, I've been in medtech now for almost 20 years. It's less and less about necessarily the technology and more about the people. And it's funny because people come to you with these great ideas, and some of them are amazing things, and you go, "How did you do
Make
this?"
that work.
Yeah, how on earth did you make that work? But then you gave an example of how the basic sort of humanistic or human bits or the commercial bits that people sort of miss, and I guess we take it for granted, right, Mick? That because we talk that language every day, and for us, it's easy. I guess that's the benefit that they get. We can't necessarily give them advice on the specific expertise, especially if they're clinicians or if they're people with a new technology, but helping pulling all that together and asking the right questions and then directing their efforts is really where we're trying to help them, I guess. That's how I sort of see BBFH. I don't know if you agree with that.
Yeah, asking the right questions is a good way of putting it. I like the fact that, I mean, it gives me a feedback that there's still people with a lot of enthusiasm out there, because all I see is roadblocks sometimes, because, I mean, one of the things I was going to say is where you're getting to a point there about saying if it's a good idea, that doesn't necessarily make it a success, right?
Yeah.
The medical device sector is slow to move. Doctors have had things in place for decades, sometimes centuries, and those procedures are not easy to change. You've got to have something really good, and even if you have something really good, it's going to take you a decade to really move the needle.
Mick, over the 6 years that you've been in BBFH, is there any sort of standout moment or pitch, company, individual, technology, whatever, that sort of comes to mind when you think back?
Yeah, there's a couple of exciting ones that I saw. One was the hip replacement positioning device. I mean, it involved lasers, so you got to kind of love that. But it had a certain self-positioning aspect to it that I thought was really neat. That was a really clear winner, I think, that year. But there was also
they've kicked on now, so they've commercialized that and they're in the market and they've got to deal with a major manufacturer. So that's fantastic.
Yeah, I thought that was a great idea. I think came out was it from Queensland or?
No, it was. Oh, I can't remember. Yes, I think it might have been. Yes.
And then the other one, I think, because I know so little about this, is the materials guys from Newcastle, who I've had the pleasure of meeting a couple of times since. But that's something that is really outside my normal experience.
The hydrogel
level, so.
technology.
Yeah, that's really cool, and it has a lot of different applications. But that was a really good pitch. So those are the two ones that really stand out in my mind.
Yeah, and how do you think the people that come through BBFH are helped by the program and by going through this process? What do you think they get out of it?
Apart from, I mean, clearly they get the experience of doing the pitch in front of a live audience, which many of them won't necessarily have had. And you do see a wide range of applicants, from people that are really early stage to ones that have been almost exhausted their funding opportunities.
Yeah.
So I think that's obviously a really good experience. But then the judges that come across a whole bunch of areas, including government, and I think that gives them a whole bunch of different sort of questions, the likes of which they're going to get from not just people trying to give money to them to keep going, but also to governments and also to users. I think you guys, we have a good way of all the people that are experienced enough to ask questions from the user's point of view, and that's one of the things that they may not always get. Yeah,
I'm really proud of the fact, and I'm very blessed to have you all as our judges, and the sort of different perspectives that you all come from, and hopefully we'll be interviewing some more as part of this series. I think really does give them that unique sort of, it's not just from a investment perspective or from a large corporate perspective or from a government perspective, it's all of those combined together. And I think having to do that in front of an audience, or just even when we're going through the screening process, really helps them shape their thinking and challenges some of their thinking. We've had some great moments, I think, and we've been really, I guess, lucky and blessed again to have so many high quality. I think each year the quality keeps on getting better with BBFH, and I'm really excited to see what happens this year. So yeah.
Me too.
Yeah.
But I am feeling pretty good about what's happened in the last 2 years. If you think about the way that we have responded to the pandemic, we as the human race have gotten a vaccine on the market in faster than any vaccine has actually been introduced, it's apparently safe in any of the real statistical models that you look at. It's as safe as it can be. And, we're basically shown nature the door again, right? Hey, you think that's going to knock us out? No way, man, right? Might slow down the economic output for a year or two, but we're back.
Yeah. Well, that's a good segue into a question I did have for today was the pandemic. How do you think that's sort of played out in terms of our industry, medtech, healthcare, like right now, and maybe in the time to come? We had a bit of an exchange before we started about that. Can you sort of maybe share your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's affected everybody slightly differently. I'm interested in the effects it's going to have on everybody that thinks working from home is the future. I think that's true for some people, but on the whole, it's not. People have realized, no, I need to get out there and interact with other people, and I do my job better when I'm there in a lot of cases. I mean, I'm sure there are loads of people that would disagree with me, but I think that a lot of people have realized, no, it's not the nirvana I thought it was going to be. But then on the flip side, for the medical device business, we kept going. We reorganized shift structures so that if one shift got infected, the other shift could carry on. We continued to manufacture. My friends that work in the healthcare system, they adapted. They converted a lot of wards at Westmead into COVID wards when they have to. Now they're back to being to being almost normal in that regard. They're doing their original functions. So I think the adaptation is really good. There's a lot more public discussion about one of my favorite topics, which is risk. And the way, I actually kind of like the idea of people discussing if are we balancing the economy or are we balancing the number of people that are going to get sick with COVID and seriously ill, and how much is a human life worth? Because those are the questions that medical device manufacturers and designers face every day. You don't write it down that way. There's no equation that says this many dollars is equivalent to some potential severity or potential harm to a human, but that's what we do. Yeah,
and that's part of the thing that I agree with you completely there with this whole concept of risk. It's sort of, people think it's a procedure or a technique or a standard that you follow, but essentially it's a way of thinking, right? Risk makes its way into everything that we do. Commercial risk, if you're going to try to get a startup off the ground. Safety, obviously, risk to the patient and the clinicians, and even risk in actually producing that product or that drug that goes into the market. So I think it's this, always try to get across to people that risk is not just a tool and a matrix that you fill out, but it's a way of thinking. And obviously that's a good part of an entrepreneurial mindset, right? So entrepreneurial mindset is all about finding value, managing risk, taking the right risks, and then also delivering and being that disciplined delivery. We were talking a little bit about before about we turned around, you just said, and we're all busy and we don't really know why. It's been, I can sense that a little bit, that things in medtech and in innovation in medtech and new companies and commercialization seems to be happening. There's things happening. Would you agree with that, or?
Yeah, there's a lot of activity. I think there's a bit of optimism too. People feel, oh, I might as well get on and do something, Plus you had a bit of time. I mean, everybody I hear is saying, oh, I had a bit of time to reflect, and I took stock of my life and found out what was important. I mean, there's a lot of people with these inner journeys that they faced because they had 9 months
to think about it,
locked in their bedroom.
Yeah.
And then they can emerge and say, well, let's go and do a couple of things. There is only limited time for each of us here. So you might as well go and do the things that you think are important.
Yeah.
So go and do them.
Because I think that's one thing that why I love medtech, because it gives you this meaningfulness to what you're doing. It's and I think that's, I guess, maybe all the people that we've met, or a lot of the people we've met in BBFH and in just generally the work that we do, it's actually really refreshing and inspiring when you see them and the passion that they have for what they're trying to do, and they're trying to make a difference. And I think perhaps there is a link there. I guess just talking about the people that are coming through this program and that we interact, if you were one of them, or maybe a younger Mick Brooks, do you have any sort of advice that you'd give to them that might help them, in a meaningful way, achieve these goals that they're setting out to do? We're dealing with a lot of clinicians and researchers and entrepreneurs and founders and groups of people. What would you say to them? I mean, hopefully they'll be listening to this.
You need to build a good team. You can't do it on your own. There needs to be more than one person involved for anything to be a success in this kind of area. It's gotten harder over the last 20 years. There's more hurdles in your way, but nothing beats having 4 or 5 people that share the passion that you have. They don't have to share it to the same degree, but they all have to believe that they're heading in the same direction. If you can assemble a team of people that work that way, that kind of way of thinking, of having small groups that have a unity of purpose, is pretty important. Even when you're working in, commercial collaborations with external consultants and things like that, that is still important.
So, Mick, one thing that I've always noticed about you and how you put teams together is that you always pick and put together a good team. Can you tell us a little bit about how you do that? Because I know that's sort of important, like you said, for people starting out trying to commercialize something, is getting a group of people. You can't do it on your own. Tell us a little bit about how you do it, because you seem to have a knack.
Interviewing is obviously the center of it. Making difficult interview questions as you go, and tailor them to the person. If this person is saying that they're an expert in something like risk, then hammer them on that. And I don't mean hammer them, make them uncomfortable, but ask them what they really know. What's the name of the standard? How does the process actually work? Get some real detail out of them. Don't let people get away with the easy answer of, yes, I'm an expert in that. Make them give you examples and push them a little bit to give you something that's really detailed. Then you also need to do a fit for culture. I'll give you an example which may or may not make it into the final thing, where I had 2 candidates I couldn't split, and I have a tendency to say, I'm going to go, in this case, with the female candidate because it's engineering and I should be a little bit proactive. So I did that, and I discussed it with my team, and they'd all met both candidates, and they said, no, we need to go with this bloke. He's a better fit culturally. And he's right. They were right. He is the best fit. I think it wouldn't have worked with the other person in hindsight. So you've got to listen to other people in the team as well.
Yeah.
Don't involve everybody in interviewing, but listen to their cultural fit about what's going to work and how they react to, those standard questions about how do you deal with a difficult employee, how did you deal with conflict in the workplace, which most people have, probably learnt the answers to. You've got to poke them around, get their example and say, well, what happens if this happens? So, and use examples real world examples that have happened to you or your team, and see what people say about them. If they just give you generalities, don't hire them. I want specifics. I want people with specific reactions.
Yeah. So I just think, most of the meetings I've been in with you, you always poke and prod, and it's never just taking that face value. And I think that's part of your success, to be honest. And like I said before, like, people really look up to you. That I know they've worked with you. My team, they've worked with you. Really look up to you in a way that you do that. You set what I noticed about how you do it, and I think it's something that people can learn from, is that you always remind people of the bigger picture. What is the purpose? Where are we going? Why are we doing this? And I think sometimes, especially given that you're in the sort of the technical part of your company, but your holistic view and how you see that bigger picture and pull it down to make it relevant to your team, I think is like fantastic. It's unbelievable. And I think that really generates that unity of purpose, as you put, and helps people execute well, right? It's all about execution. You can have the greatest idea in the world, but if you can't execute, and a large part of that is the right people that you said, but also that unity of vision, and putting it together, I think you've done a really
I think
great
that
job
bigger picture role, because you pointed that out too. I mean, you've helped shape what I've thought about some of these things too. So you talked about a thing where people thrash early on in a design and then narrow down towards the end, and you've got to help people whittle out the stuff that is not going to be necessary. I mean, I got a couple of examples of that. One was in the 1990s, there were huge arguments in software engineering about particular operating systems, and even the order of the bits within microprocessor cores, right? The little endian versus big endian wars, for anybody that remembers them.
I don't know.
and they were essentially stupid, right? They had no point. And I saw people waste hours and hours, good engineers wasting hours and hours on this, side affairs. The whole point is anybody going to buy this product? And is this product going to work reliably so that customers are happy with it? And the best thing that happens with some of our products in medical devices is that either the radiographer or the nurse or the doctor uses our product and forgets that they used it because it just fitted into what they were trying to achieve. Their goal is not to use
or buy your device or anything.
Their goal is to help this patient. And if you give them something that helps the patient, they forget they even used you, and that's what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, absolutely, Mick. I guess we got to start wrapping this up. And I have noticed we are twinning today. For those who see this, it wasn't pre-planned.
I thought it was just a radio.
Yeah, there you go. I guess just a final thoughts. We've been through a tough year, most of us. It's been challenging. Looking forward to the future. What are you hoping for 2022? We can put 2021 and 2020 aside. What are you hopeful for the industry, for what you're going to be involved in 2022, Mick?
Well, I hope people have been beavering away, and we're going to see a whole bunch of really good applications this year in BBFH. So I'm looking forward to that. And then next year, I'm looking forward to getting back out to the clinical world, because the thing that really drives us all is when you see the devices that you've worked on or the equipment that you've worked on in the hands of clinicians being used. And that's what we all do it for. You go in there and you see people using it and you see the outcomes. That's really why we're here.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. Okay. That was great, Mick. It was my first interview with someone like this, and I really enjoyed it. Really look forward to going through the applications and nominating a winner of BBFH 2021. Hopefully next year we can get to an in-person, back to our old style of events. This year it's gone virtual again. So I really appreciate your time today, and hopefully people got a little bit out of that, got to know you a little bit more. Thanks again, and great to see you again, mate.
Thanks a lot for inviting me, Richard.